since the first generation of Pokemon, people have been debating which Pokemon would hypothetically taste the best. Classic debate. We've all heard it. But I'm bored of that question. It lacks specificity. It lacks context. Also, while this used to be a pool of 151 Pokemon, it's now a pool of 1,025. So it's time to revisit this question in a new light. And I apologize to vegans and vegetarians in advance, but today I want to know which Pokemon would taste best on a steak. Specificity, context, stupidity. Beautiful. Now, the concept of this video actually went through several revisions. It started with user loan representatives' comment on one of my videos suggesting which rock-type Pokemon could be the tastiest if added to your meal like salt, which they very kindly gave me permission to use, and so my version was gonna be which Pokemon would be the best seasoning on steak. So I started that process by researching what types of seasoning were among the most popular with professional chefs. And I found that across the board, every article that was coming up said that salt, specifically kosher salt, was the #1 seasoning for steaks, especially during the preparation process. Kosher salt comes from mines, so I got really excited about the possibility of looking into the regions and specific caves and mines that different rock Pokemon could be found in order to potentially determine their chemical composition and how that compared to kosher salt. And then I found out there's a salt Pokemon. They made a salt Pokemon. Gen 9, 932 to 934. Literally says that people in Pokemon eat the salt from its body. Pretty anticlimactic. So then I was like, okay, how about a top 5? And it's not necessarily seasoning, but just whatever goes best on steak. Because here's the thing, it's weird, but if there wasn't a salt Pokemon, I would feel comfortable comparing rock Pokemon to judge which is the most like salt. But as soon as you put a salt Pokemon in the mix, it's a completely moot question. Like, imagine picking up a few random rocks and ranking them in a which tastes most like salt list, but salt is also on the list. What's the point of the other ones? There's already salt. If salt's included, you can't compare rocks to salt. It's madness. So anyway, this became a top 5 Pokemon on steak in general list. Then, as I was going through all the Pokemon, I realized that there were some that I wanted to choose because of their bodily composition, and some that I wanted to choose because they carried or produced a product that could be used on steak. I didn't like that I wasn't consistent. So I said, alright, 2 top 5 lists. One of the top 5 Pokemon that would go directly on steak, aka like some component of their existing bodies could be used as a main ingredient in a steak topping. And a second category of the top 5 Pokemon whose products or something that they possess that wasn't inherently part of their bodies could go on steak. So we went from a single answer to a simple question to a top 10 list with categories. Wish there wasn't a salt Pokemon, man. Okay, so starting with the top 5 Pokemon that can be used directly on steak, we can go ahead and get the salt Pokemon out of the way. The 3 evolutions are Knackley, Knacklestack, and Garganacl, and you can really take your pick of the litter. They all produce and are made of salt, so rather than have the 3 evolutions take up 3 spots, I'm just gonna put them all in a group and have them in one spot. But here's where things get interesting, because while kosher salt, which comes from mines, was the most popular salt of choice for steak, that was mainly in regards to preparation. The most highly recommended finishing salt was sea salt, which, as you may have guessed, comes from evaporating seawater. Sea salt works best as a finishing salt due to its large, flaky, uneven crystals that dissolve quickly and its retention of minerals from the sea that give it a more complex taste. Now, there are Pokemon that have water incorporated into their bodies, like Araquanid and Castform, but Castform is only in its rainy form when it's raining, making it near impossible to evaporate, and both Pokemon have the issue of not necessarily being composed of salt water. Castform because rain is fresh water, and Araquanid because while it can be found in salt water, it is more commonly found by lakes. And it kind of felt like cheating to set up something where like Knacklestack used the move purifying salt on them to make them become salt water. Because then even if you were to evaporate the water part, you would once again be left with Knacklestack salt. But out of the darkness appeared Jellicent, whose Pokedex entries repeatedly claim are mostly seawater, with Pokemon Sword's entry reading most of this Pokemon's body composition is identical to seawater. We got our Pokemon. Jellicent, it's been nice knowing you, but by evaporating the water part of your body, we can get a delicious sea salt for our steak. Thank you for your sacrifice. Hey yo, it's Big Frankie from Big Frankie's Playhouse Emporium, and you might be noticing the old mustache looks especially grown today. And that's because today's video is in partnership with Manscaped, the men's grooming brand trusted by over 12 million men worldwide. Father's Day is coming up, and let's be honest, Pops doesn't need another coffee mug or a best pop ever short. Get him something he'll actually use, the Chairman Pro from Manscaped, the perfect Father's Day gift for the Pops who deserves to look and feel his best. The Chairman Pro is a high-tech, data-proof grooming upgrade and electric foil face shaver that can tackle up to 5 days of growth. We're talking a 360-degree contouring head, 2 interchangeable skin-safe blades for a smooth shave of that classic distinguished gentle rat stubble. Flex adjust technology, cause this guy's face ain't flat, so why should his razor be? This thing's waterproofed, be easily cleanable, and pups will never be left not knowing how much juice the Chairman Pro's got left thanks to the digital battery display and up to 75 minutes of runtime on a single charge. That's a lot of juice. Manscaped also offers a 2-year warranty on powered devices. And you can use promo code Goombanna for 15% off your entire order. That's 15% off with promo code Goombanna at manscaped.com. Or if you need today, you can find a Manscaped store near you. Get over here. And it's at this point that we move away from the salt. Kind of. For a bit. Because it's not just seasonings that make for the best steak toppers. Sauces are also found in a variety of steak dishes around the world. Now, sauces can get a bit complicated in this instance because they usually use multiple ingredients, and it's not like there's an A1 Pokemon with all these ingredients just hanging off of it. So in order to not make this an impossible task, when selecting these Pokemon, they just have to be the main base ingredient. For instance, if this were a video on which Pokemon would make great sandwich spreads and there were a peanut Pokemon, I would say you could make peanut butter out of them and grant you all of the sugar and other stuff that peanut butter has in it. But I'm not gonna take advantage of this by listing a single ingredient in a complex dish that really depends on the other flavors. Like, I'm not gonna say you can make a pizza out of a tomato Pokemon. Capiche? With that established, I turn our attention to cream-based sauces. A steak Diane, for example, which often has a base of heavy cream. And what do you know? Milcery is a Pokemon made entirely of cream. And we can take it a step further. Milcery evolves into Alchemy, which comes in a variety of flavors. The one which would best lend itself to the flavor profile being the salted cream flavor. Snuck's all back in there. Now listen, I'm no fool. I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Alchemy is whipped cream, which is so insanely different from cream in this instance. Whipped cream on steak feels cursed. But I would be remiss not to mention that whipped cream on top of meat is actually not unheard of. Svichkova is a Czech dish consisting of usually beef tenderloin and a cream sauce that traditionally is served with whipped cream. However, I'm not quite ready to put whipped cream on our steak just yet. And I actually think we can do even better than either whipped cream or cream. Because when you over-whip whipped cream, the cream starts to separate from the buttermilk and becomes butter. And just like that, we have a salted butter to use on our steak. And you winced at the thought of alchemy on a steak. Let me cook! Literally. Okay, I pulled a little plot twist with that last one talking about sauces and then pivoting to butter at the last second, but I'm gonna stay on another type of sauce this time. There aren't a ton of fruits that immediately jump out as pairing well with steak, but one that makes a surprisingly great sauce for steak is the humble cherry. That's right, with Cherubi, which is said in the Pokedex to be sweet, tasty, and nutrient-rich, we're going to make a lovely cherry sauce. Which I did not make up, thank you very much. It is a real thing. Okay, before we get to our last contestant of the 5 Pokemon that would directly be useful for a steak topping, I want to give some honorable mentions. First of all, my personal favorite steak sauce is a Béarnaise. My dad makes the best steak and Béarnaise in the world, and that's an indisputable fact that scientists agree on. So of course I want to see if it was humanly possible to make a Béarnaise sauce out of Pokemon. Okay, hearing myself just now, I am realizing how dark this video is. But we're this far in. Anyways, the problem is that a huge component of what gives Béarnaise sauce its flavor is the tarragon. And tarragon obviously isn't the only herb that would work well with steaks. I mean, even a chimichurri sauce is a popular go-to for steaks. So naturally, I looked at all the Pokemon that had some sort of greenery growing out of them. And yes, I did look into how to tell edible plants from non-edible ones. And the more I read about the warning signs of toxic plants, the more unsure I became. Glossy leaves, groups of 3 leaves. I mean, look, even the ones where the Pokedex mentions that they're edible still come with no guarantee that it would match the taste of an existing herb. That's the biggest problem. Every herb has such a specific flavor, and while herbs may be plants, plants are not all herbs, all square rectangle-like. Herbs versus plants is the exact same energy as salt versus rocks. So this is why I ruled out the Pokemon that exhibited greenery. No good taste guarantee. Another thing that makes for a key ingredient in many a yummy steak topping is garlic. What I wouldn't give for a garlic Pokemon right now. Do you know how excited I got when I saw Petalil? The Petalil is not a garlic. While its head is a bulb, looking at the flower on its evolution, it's very likely a lily bulb. Garlic does flower as well, but its flowers look nothing like the flowers on Lilligant or the Hisuian Lilligant, so that's out. The final honorable mention I want to give is to Toadschool and Toadscruel. A mushroom sauce is also a relatively common sauce to find on steaks, but I don't trust that any of these other mushrooms won't kill me. Some have toxic spores, some have spores that cause drowsiness, and also have the most don't eat this coloring that I can possibly imagine. And then the mushrooms on Paris and Parasect are straight up known to be parasitic fungi called Tochikaso mushrooms, which are based on caterpillar fungi, which are used in Eastern medicine but are not eaten because they do not taste good. Which brings us to Toadschool and Toadscruel, which are the only ones where the Pokedex specifies that the flaps that fall off their bodies have a chewy and delicious taste. Ugh. While the term chewy flaps causes me psychic damage, these Pokemon are actually based on the real-world wood ear mushroom, which is used in Chinese cuisine, even appearing in some beef dishes. The reason it's not making the list today is because those dishes that use both beef and wood ear are almost always stir-fries, which often rely heavily on other ingredients as well, and doesn't exactly fit the situation I've established of putting something on a steak. But it gets an honorable mention. You could eat a Toadstool and Scroll. So who did get that sweet, sweet final spot for the first half of this list? Well, so far all of our toppings have been pretty tame, so I think it's time for some spiciness. To give our steak a little kick and pay homage to popular recipes like peppercorn-crusted steak au poivre and chili rubs, we're going with Capsicid and its evolution Scovillain. Both Pokemon have chili peppers for heads, Capsicid being a combination of capsaicin, the chemical compound that gives chili peppers their heat, and Kid, and Scovillain being a combination of Scoville, a unit of spiciness used to measure the heat of chili peppers, and Villain. And parts of Capsicid are already canonically eaten. Pokemon Violet's Pokedex entry reads, traditional Paldean dishes can be extremely spicy because they include the shed front teeth of Capsicid among their ingredients. So we've got a couple options here. We could either simply use the teeth and grind them up to create a spicy seasoning, or use it in a rub, or you can use the actual pepper heads themselves as a grilled topping. Again, dark, but necessary to the conversation. So Capsicid and Scovillain are rounding out our first 5 delicious Pokemon. Alright, time for our top 5 Pokemon who wouldn't necessarily go well on steak themselves, but they possess or produce something that would complement a steak well. For our first contestant, we're taking it back to the original 151 with Farfetch'd for his Scallion, also known as a green onion, and the Galarian Farfetch'd for his leek. That's right, these two subspecies have different vegetables. And I know my Scallions. There's a certain meal delivery service where I'm not sure if I've ever seen a meal that doesn't include Scallions. 99% of the time, you can find me passed out on my kitchen floor covered in wilted scallions. Anyways, there are many a scallion-centered steak recipe, but there are also plenty of leek-centered recipes too, so I'm not really picky here. Either way, welcome to the party, Farfetch'd. Please leave your onion at the door. Next up, we have the Pokemon that used to be my answer to the classic question of which of the first-gen Pokemon would be the tastiest, Chansey. With both the meat and the egg, I argued a mean case for a Chansey Benedict. But today, we're just gonna be looking at the egg, and I will happily throw Chansey's evolution Blissey into the mix here too. While my beloved Béarnaise sauce does have egg yolks as a main ingredient, I simply cannot overlook the lack of tarragon here. However, steak and eggs is a thing. Now, admittedly, many times you will see them next to each other, but having a fried egg on top of a steak is definitely not unheard of. Now, whether a Chansey or a Blissey egg would be preferable is a bit of a tricky question. Various Pokedex entries describe Chansey's eggs as nutritious, succulent, extremely delicious, a high-class cooking ingredient, and easily and eagerly devoured by even those people who have lost their appetite. A strong contender. Meanwhile, these are some of the things that the Pokedex has to say about Blissey's eggs. Anyone who takes even one bite of Blissey's egg becomes unfailingly caring and pleasant to everyone. They're eggs that bring happiness and a smile to any face, making everyone around smile with joy. They're a delicacy that fetch the highest prices on the market, and they're delicious and bring good fortune to those who eat them. Powerful stuff. Blissey's eggs feel like they should require a prescription. You're looking for Blissey's eggs at the grocery store, you go to the pharmacy section. But you can see how they both have their strong points. I'm not sure if there's too significant of a difference in taste, so Chansey and Blissey are both going in this spot. One topping that I kept coming across again and again when looking at steak recipes was goat cheese. There were so many goat cheese recipes. That being the case, how could I not include Skidoo, who is straight up said to provide milk for an assortment of goods in Pokemon the Series XY? I mean, this is pretty straightforward. Milk a Skidoo, make some Skidoo goat cheese, enjoy. Also, you might be like, Anna, that doesn't look like goat cheese. Isn't goat cheese like soft or crumbly? That's definitely most often how it's sold to the public, but you can have a wheel of goat cheese that can be sliced into wedges, so I'm not dissuaded that this is supposed to be a goat cheese. Therefore, Skidoo takes the spot. Our next one is a little controversial, but I'm willing to make an argument for it, and that's Dolive and Arboliva. Both are said by the Pokedex to produce and share their delicious nutrient-rich oil with others, which one must assume would be an olive oil of sorts. Olive oil isn't usually used in the process of cooking steak because searing a steak requires high temperatures and olive oil has a low smoke point, but I would like to instead pitch the oil as a finishing oil. I'll be the first to admit that adding straight up and down olive oil to a steak is somewhat rare, the main concerns being overpowering the natural taste of the steak and adding a fat to a dish that already has fats in it. But when a high-quality olive oil is lightly drizzled on a steak, the acidity can actually counterbalance that fattiness and heaviness, and the flavor of the oil can add a complementary complexity. Olive oil is also used as a base when making lots of lighter sauces that go on steaks and work well with garlic and rosemary. Dolive and Arboliva actually toe the line between the directly on steak and indirectly on steak Pokemon though, because their olives most resemble Kalamata olives, and there are multiple recipes out there for Kalamata olive chimichurri sauce, which uses both the olive oil and the olives themselves. But I think the fact that they fit into both categories speaks to their deservedness of a place on this list even more. The only one who can't also make it is Smoliv, because its oil is said to be bitter and astringent enough to make one flinch. Sorry, bud. Maybe next year. Our final contender is going to be the most challenging one on this list, so I think I'd better rip the band-aid off now. It's Shuckle. I would like to use Shuckle juices on my steak. And no, I will not allow you a moment to take that in. Buckle up and come with me. For those who don't know, Shuckle collects berries and stores them in its shell. I would like to now read you the Pokedex entries on said berries and their resulting juices. The berries it stores in its vase-like shell decompose and become a gooey liquid. The berries mix with its body fluids to become a juice. The berries eventually ferment to become delicious juices. The berries stored in its vase-like shell eventually become a thick, pulpy juice. This berry juice is so mysterious. In the game, Shuckle can use either plain berries in Gen 2 or orange berries in Gen 3 to make berry juice. But in the game, and in fact in Pokemon Horizons, this berry juice is orange. From this, I must assume that the orange berry, although dark blue on the outside like a typical blueberry, likely has orange-colored flesh on the inside, which makes its bumpy exterior and name make more sense, I guess. And in Pokemon Horizons, they seem to enjoy the taste, but I must return to the Pokedex descriptions. These berries have decomposed and fermented. Fermentation is a bacterial process where yeast converts the sugar in the drink to energy for its own use, releasing carbon dioxide and alcohol as waste products. While fermented drinks like wine obviously contain large amounts of alcohol, all fermented drinks contain some alcohol, even if it's in very small amounts, which makes these children drinking it all the more concerning. You know, you always feel young and with it till you find out the kids are getting turned on Shuckle juice. No, but we can assume from this that the berry juice that Shuckle makes is a low alcohol content, like kombucha or fruit kvass. Kvass being a popular Russian fermented drink that's traditionally made from rye bread, commonly dubbing it as bread soda in English. But you can also make it with fruit, hence fruit kvass. But even these fermented drinks with low alcohol content still have a sour and bitterness to them, since part of the fermentation process is the sugar breaking down. What's more, the orange berry started out with a somewhat consistent flavor across the board in Generation 3, but lost all of its sweetness in Generation 4. This would not be a delicious sweet drink. Although, we found out from Johto League champions that you can just sort of shove anything in a Shuckle and let it marinate, so maybe they added a little something on. Also, what happened to the gooey consistency? But wait, it gets more confusing, because in XY Kalos Quest, Clement says he used berry juice as a base along with big mushrooms to make this creamy stew? What is happening? But okay, let's look at the facts. Shuckle takes an orange berry and ferments it into a kombucha-like beverage that may or may not have an orangey kind of taste and may or may not be gooey. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's a pure liquid. We could boil it to reduce it either way, so I'm going to imagine it's a reduction. I'll prefer a fermented true berry taste as opposed to the orange bit, because then honestly we're just talking about a balsamic glaze. But honestly, even an orange-leaning balsamic glaze does not sound that bad. And apparently I'm not the only one who thinks so, considering there are already steak recipes involving orange glazes. I'll tell you what, I am so convinced that this could work that I will go buy some sort of orangey tasting kvass or kombucha and post a video on Patreon of me making a reduction out of it and eating it on a steak sometime in the next, 2 weeks. I need some time to gather my courage. Shuckle's going on the list. So there are your top 10 Pokemon that would directly or indirectly taste best on a steak. Which one would you be most willing to try and you can't pick the actual salt ones? Not allowed. And who's hopping on this Shuckle Juice train with me? I hope you enjoyed this little dive into the culinary, and be sure to subscribe for more profoundly ridiculous and ridiculously profound questions about video games that you didn't know you wanted to know until now. If you'll excuse me, I need to go get me some fermented juice for dinner, but I'll see you on the next one. Later!
Goombanna is the wonder why she didn't come to play. Gaming vids that'll make you laugh and think and put them on replay. Intelligent, kind and funny, her community's #1. Stick around and kick your feet up. Goombanna has just begun.